Colonel Hans Landa is an exceptionally intelligent, multilingual, charismatic, evil villain. He's played by Christoph Waltz in Quentin Tarantino's Inglorious Bastards. We're introduced to this terrible person, an SS officer and the main antagonist of this movie, when he arrives on a farm in France, a farm owned by the Lapadites family during the occupation of France in 1943. He has a broad smile on his face. He's completely courteous and polite to the family, shaking hands, asking for permission to come into their home, complimenting each daughter one by one. He then starts a long-winded conversation about how he earned his terrible nickname, the Jew Hunter, an awful nickname he's actually proud of. He compares actual human beings to rats, with a smile on his face. But then, out of nowhere, the smile on his face suddenly disappears. Lapadite is physically trembling out of sheer terror without any explicit threats made by the SS. With the smile on his face gone, we get to see the biggest and most important skill of Hans Landa, manipulation. But to really understand how ingenious and devastatingly effective Hans Landa's manipulative skills are, let's go back to the beginning. Upon giving the opening scenes a second watch, we see all of the subtle signs of a master manipulator. Everything he does is all part of an act. The smile on his face, the handshake, the over-the-top compliments directed at his daughters are all part of a carefully choreographed act. The act is meant to simultaneously give them a false sense of hope and civility, but also threaten them without uttering a single threatening word. A good example of a non-verbal threat is the prolonged eye contact he has with Lapadite's daughters. It's a good way to remind Lapadite what he has to lose, and the heavily armed SS shooters outside really drive home that point. The false sense of hope he dangles at Lapadite is the idea that his presence at their farm is just a formality, dotting the I's, crossing the T's, all that. The manipulation escalates when he asks Lapadite to elaborate what he's heard about him.
I've heard that the Führer has put you in charge of running up the Jews left in France.
Forcing Lapadite to explain that he is the expert in hunting Jewish people is 1. A show of power, 2. A subtle way of saying you have no hope but to cooperate. He asks very specific questions about the Dreyfus family, the Jewish family hiding under the floor. Alarming questions, ages, how many children, everything. He already knew everything. With a casual, friendly smile on his face, he continues to interrogate and wear down Lapadite's defense. Lapadite desperately hopes to avoid the SS death squad outside, but more importantly, his daughters. The daughters Hans Landa went out of his way to compliment. So that by the time Landa goes from smiling to serious, Monsieur Lapadite is already broken. He's given a way out. If you aid me, you will be rewarded with leave you alone forever. Lapadite is no longer capable of resisting. He confirms that the Dreyfus family are hiding under his floorboards. Hans Landa brings in the SS and then proceeds to commit mass murder. Only one escapes, Shoshana. Landa could have killed her, but instead chooses to let her live. We'll circle back to this moment when I highlight another important character trait. After the shootout in the basement, when a meeting goes horribly wrong, Landa is called into the village to investigate what happened between several German soldiers and Aldo's bastards. We see just how intelligent and attentive Hans truly is when he recognizes Hugo Stiglitz and Wiki without any help. We also see his extraordinary Sherlock Holmes level of investigation when he deduced that the crime scene wasn't complete. Someone survived and left the basement. He of course finds the evidence he needed, a lady's shoe and a hanky with von Hammersmack's signature on lipstick. She was the survivor he was looking for. At the movie premiere, we see him staring at von Hammersmack and the bastards. He has a pretty good idea what they're up to. They're masquerading as Italian escorts. But rather than arresting them, he begins toying with them. He immediately brings up von Hammersmack's leg wrapped up in a cast. You know, the one she got shot in. She gave rock climbing accident as an excuse. Then the act comes back. He laughs hysterically in a way that would make everyone uncomfortable. Remember, Hans Landa is multilingual, and one of the languages he's fluent in is Italian. He also knows that they don't know Italian, so he proceeds to toy with them in Italian. He watches them struggle to fake being Italians. The act escalates when he takes von Hammersmack away to have a private word. He orders her to put up her leg, takes off her shoe. Then he asks her to reach into his jacket, pull out the shoe she left behind during the shootouts. This means, of course, she realizes she's been found out. This is the next important trait we must talk about when it comes to Hans Landa: sadism. Sadism is defined as the tendency to derive pleasure from inflicting pain, suffering, or humiliation on others. This brings us back to the beginning of the movie, when he continues pushing La Petite, watching the fear in his eyes, his daughter's eyes. I can't help but feel he enjoyed it. You can see when he drags Bridget von Hammersmack, she was extremely scared, going out of his way to put the shoe on her feet like some sort of Cinderella play, did nothing but push her psychologically. It matters because he could have just skipped all this and just killed her without toying with her. My theory on why he left Shoshana live was to maximize her pain. I think he believed he could have caught her later. To him, it's all part of some sick game. It's just my theory, but you have to admit there is something to be considered there. He shows his most defining trait, the trait that governs his entire personality: opportunism. He is not a man who is brainwashed by sentiment or Nazi ideology or any of that, because after killing von Hammersmack, capturing Aldo and one of his men, he decides to betray the Nazis and make a deal to help kill Hitler and his inner circle in exchange for total immunity from his war crimes. He even wanted a home in Nantucket Island, a retired colonel's salary, and a whole bunch of other goodies. Joining the Nazi party was simply a way to increase his power and prestige. The fact that he carried out terrible atrocities was simply a cold, calculated way to keep his power and the privileges that come with those powers. So when he could no longer gain power and wealth because the war had decisively turned against the Nazis, he simply abandoned his post. He even tried to distance himself from the nickname, the Jew Hunter, that he was so proud of at the beginning. He got the deal he wanted, but Aldo broke rank and carved a swastika on his face at the end of the movie. Fanatics are awful and should be dealt with to the full extent of the law. But I don't know about you watching this video. There's something really sinister about someone who commits atrocities in the name of dreadful causes they don't even subscribe to. All for status, money, or promotion, or even just acceptance. Don't get me wrong, there's very little separating the fanatic brainwashed Nazis and people like Hans Landa, but I think because he knew better, I consider him worse than the lunatics. The SS uniform he's always seen wearing throughout the movie made him a menace to begin with, but that awful nickname he earned qualifies him as worse than evil. What makes SS Colonel Hans Landa truly terrifying is his intelligence and ability to manipulate other people. He is extremely charismatic, a skill he uses to disarm anyone he targets. The only thing worse than an evil villain is a smart evil villain who does his homework.